All right, so there's a lot of people out there who will ask me email or just in general consulting conversations, talk about basically credibility. They don't necessarily always word it that way, but they come back and they say that my boss doesn't listen or my colleagues don't listen or my wife doesn't listen or my husband doesn't listen, and they have a credibility issue. Or they're in sales and they're having a hard time convincing a client to get something done. They're in leadership and they can't move their team to action. This is about credibility. So I'm going to give you 4 different ways that you can actually increase your credibility, and you can do it very, very fast. The first one's kind of cliche, but it's true, and it's to listen. People destroy and lose their credibility when they speak too quickly. Now, there is a misnomer about this, and that is that you have to have relentless levels of excessive listening before you can build credibility. And that's actually not true at all. There's actually, ironically, a time where a person will speak to a certain degree and you will cut them off because your credibility is so high and you have the ability to refute what it is they're saying in rapid pace. But that's rare. It's very rare, in fact, because quite often the mistake that we make is to cut them off too early. They have more to say, and if we'd have listened to the entire thing, we'd have a different opinion or outlook on what they're doing. But I just don't want you to think of it as a steadfast rule to like have excessive amounts of listening. That's usually something that people advocate more as a virtue signal. But there should be a lot of listening. And this is the first way you can increase your credibility. If you're talking over other people, you're talking before they make their point, you're not listening at all, you're going to have a very difficult time establishing any credibility whatsoever. Okay, the next thing is actually very important, and it's acknowledging. So in sales, there's this classic thing that you listen to what the customer's objections are, and then you actually acknowledge it. You agree that this is a reasonable thing. Now, you don't agree with it in that if somebody says it's way too expensive, you go, yes, it's way too expensive. You walk your way out of a sale. But you'd say, I can definitely see why you'd think that. In fact, that makes sense. And then you would acknowledge what it is that they have as an opinion. Somebody says, I don't need one. You're in sales again. And you'd say, well, that makes sense. I can see why you'd say that. And you would say, you have this and you have that. But then what you do is you provide additional reasons for why those objections that they have that you've acknowledged are incomplete. And that if they had further information, they would actually get beyond that particular objection and they would want that product or service and idea. It's a classic sales thing, but it's good in any form of actually raising credibility. That is to listen and then acknowledge. I understand. That makes sense. Good point. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with it. I've given this example before that acknowledgement is a lot like understanding. If you have 2 people that are completely different in their understanding, even a moral thing, for example, most of us agree that murder is wrong. Okay. But if you don't understand why people can murder somebody, you're just not paying attention. Understanding why people murder somebody isn't an agreement of it. It's the acknowledgement of it. I understand you are very angry. I understand that he stole from you. He hurt somebody. He cheated on you, whatever. Okay. So it's acknowledging it. It's understanding it. It's not saying, therefore it was good and right and I agree. No. But you acknowledge it. So the first thing is you listen. The second thing is you acknowledge. What does that do to increase your credibility? It gives the other person the opportunity to say, they're smart. They're smart enough to agree with the idea that I make sense. Okay. And so if they want to now provide a counter to that, it's not based on, hey, you're stupid. In other words, this is how people who don't think you're credible look at you. They say, well, they immediately disregard me, so I don't find them credible. They would be credible if they would at least acknowledge what I'm saying. They don't have to agree with it, but just acknowledge it. And acknowledge, by the way, that even if you think it's wrong, that I'm not coming from a place of complete, utter stupidity. So what's interesting is that most people, when they're establishing your credibility, are doing it based on whether or not you are accepting them. It's actually a very funny thing. So here's another way of looking at it. Trust is very much like that. Trust requires one person to go first. And so if you go to somebody and you're in an early relationship with them and you say, I just want you to know, I trust you. Therefore, I'll give you that responsibility, or would you watch this for me, or care for this, or I've got something I want to tell you and I'm going to tell you because I trust you. Very often that person says, well, they're smart. they're going to trust me. They're clearly a person of good judgment. And if they have good judgment, I judge them to have good judgment. So therefore, I judge them to be good too. So that's an ironic thing about it, is most often the pride and arrogance of other people is the thing that they're measuring how you perceive, as opposed to whether or not you actually have credibility. They're not saying, is this person able to make a rational decision about the particular topic at hand, and do they have the credentials to do so, or therefore they have, they are credible? No, they're saying, do they like me and respect me? If they do, they're credible. As crazy as that sounds, it's a reality. But it can't just stop there, because if it did, your credibility would be merely a popularity contest, and it has to be stronger than that. But the first thing you do is listen. The next thing you do is acknowledge. And the third thing you do is you ask. You ask further questions. Let me just make sure I'm understanding this. I hear what you're saying, and in fact, I think it makes sense. But let me just clarify that I understand what you're saying. You're saying that from your perspective, you've only seen this, this, and this, and so with that information, why would you possibly do X, Y, Z? And that makes sense to me. Am I hearing that correctly, or is there more? No, that's it? Okay. So what did you do? You listened, you acknowledged, and you asked. And they say, no, there's nothing more. Now what you do is you say, well, there's additional information that I want to share with you. And you're increasing your credibility because you didn't disregard them right away. You're acknowledging things from their perspective. But here's where the actual raw reality of actual credibility comes in. And it's well beyond the things that I've mentioned before, which are more or less like communication skills and tactics that are used to establish credibility. This is where credibility really sits there. And it would be to say, well, the information that I have is based on, and now you note it. And you don't just say, science says, but you say, there was a 1982 study which indicated this for the first time between Hershey and, Martinson, that was represented by 1,800 different individual people that they studied. And that has been fortified with two other studies, including the most recent one in 2024 by blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And here's a document that shares that. And it's very interesting to note. That's a very important thing you're doing. You're providing a reason for the fact that you believe something, which elevates your credibility. Way too many people think that their opinion alone is what should drive and move others to believe in them. But it's got to be more than that. Unfortunately today, there's something that would be considered scientism, and that is the belief that science has an answer to all things, and it doesn't, by the way. There are many mysteries in the world that are outside the purview of what science can actually provide in philosophy, theology, these sorts of things, where science falls short. But it's a buzzword. I mean, in almost everything now, people go, science tells us everything. Science has the answer to relationships. Science has the answer to, and they provide acknowledgement. Why do they do that? Even if it's a bunch of BS, by the way. They do it because they know that their credibility goes up when they can say science backs it up for them. It's like having some big dude stand behind you as you're about to get into a fight and you say, hey, you really want to mess with me? And it's that information right behind you, or that guy right behind you, that gets them to actually see that you're somebody that should not be trifled with. Even if it's not you, it's that credential behind you. And that's why people say science says, science says. So it can be misused, no doubt about it. But if you are using it the right way and an effective way, you're going to do much better. This goes along with things like hearsay. You might say, well, so-and-so said so. And everybody's left to believe, well, if they did say so, then it makes you more credible because they said it. But how am I to believe that you're not just saying that? Well, I have a video of them actually saying that. And of course, now with, AI and computer graphics, it can be a little bit dubious there too, but you understand the point. So listen, acknowledge, ask, and notate. And if you do that, credibility goes way up.